are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support the show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder, where every day is Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It is Friday, October 18th, 2019. My name is Sam Steeder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. It's Casual Friday, folks. Things are not casual around here. Crazy week of news. On the program today, we're going to start with a interview with Eric Blanc, who's going to give us an update on what's happening with the Chicago teachers' strike. And with us all day will be Nomiki Konst. In the meantime, Mick Mulvaney admits quid pro quo. Wait a second, did I say that out loud? Meanwhile, after a rigorous search, Trump administration awards his hotel the G7 hosting rights. Meanwhile, Erdogan manhandles Trump and Kurds will pay. Speaking of pay, a $50 billion settlement of the opioid case may be in the offing. The New York City Council votes to close Rikers, but then build 4 new jails. Meanwhile, Rick Perry to resign. And congratulations, September 2019 was the hottest ever in North America. The Republicans' most vulnerable senators are losing ground. Very disturbing CDC report. Suicide rates of 10 to 14-year-old children have increased 3 times in the past 10 years. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a lot to get to today. So much news. I have really not been able to sleep for the past week because of just the constant barrage of news. But joining me today, Michael is ill. Joining, sadly, but fortunately, Nomi was coming into studio anyways.
Yeah.
So
more talking time. Yes. Thanks, Michael.
Exactly. Before we get into stuff and before we get to Eric Blanc, a little bit of house cleaning. We have some great news, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, if you go to your app store, whether you are iOS or Android, or you can just go to majorityapp.com for the links, you will find a new updated Majority Report app. On that app, not only will you have the ability to search our entire set of shows, you also have the ability to download shows. I'm getting in the subway. I can't stream it. Okay, download it. And then you look in the menu, it's in your downloads folder, and then you can also get rid of it. There's also, obviously, all the links to support the show and But also on that show, ladies, on the app I'm holding here in my hand, you go to AMQ. So not only can you get the Majority Report live. Right now, we're live. As you can see, live now shows up on the app, gives you the opportunity to call, or you can go look at the YouTube show, or you can play the show. That's going to be weird. Now shows up on the app. Gives you there it is. There you go.
Creepy.
Yeah, it's creepy. And or you can just call into the show, and you can message at the bottom the show down there. And then if you go to the podcast, obviously has all the podcasts. As you can see, I'm a member of the show, so I get the member version. And then Oh, what's this AMQ? What the heck is that?
Go look at the YouTube show.
Oh, wait, that's the Majority Report Live. Wait a second. Sorry.
So easy.
Oh, here we go.
It is Friday, October 18th. I'm Sam Cedar.
Yeah, that's the AM Quickie is available right there on the app. So you can either subscribe, of course, the AM Quickie in other places, but so there it is, all in one place. We're going to add the link to the Instagram account as well. On that app, but we don't have it up yet. Just occurs to me we need to do that. You got to check out the Instagram. We have a huge supercomputer that uses artificial intelligence and puts up all the best content that you could possibly want on the Instagram feed. We have one Joe Biden taking a selfie. And not quite figuring out how you're supposed to hold the phone. But that's all right.
Is that with the teeth in or without the teeth?
Yeah, no, I think the teeth were in on that one. All right, so let's just start here. This, any one of the top four stories I have here, we could spend an entire show on. But we don't have the ability to do that. Yesterday, the Trump administration announced that they had struck the deal of a lifetime with Turkey. This is after releasing the letter that looked like it was written by an 8-year-old and supposedly showing how tough Donald Trump was. Here he is making the announcement about the supposed ceasefire. Within moments after this, Turkey made it clear this is not a ceasefire. It's just a pause. And it's basically what this amounts to is basically saying, like, look, you got 5 days to go. We're going to either ethnically cleanse this area the easy way or we're going to do it the hard way. And that's basically what Turkey is saying. And Donald Trump is announcing this as if it is some type of huge feat of diplomacy. He waved essentially Turkey in. Turkey is a NATO affiliate. I mean, a signed member of NATO. And the idea that the United States wouldn't have the ability to say to Turkey, no, you're not doing this, and it didn't have the leverage is, of course, absurd. But here's Donald Trump trying to spin this in some way. And nobody seems to be buying it. I mean, I imagine the people who don't care about it at all buy it, some of his supporters, but nobody seems to be buying this.
But this is an incredible outcome. This outcome is something they've been trying to get for 10 years, everybody, and they couldn't get it. Other administrations, and they never would have been able to get it unless you went somewhat unconventional. I guess I'm an unconventional person. I took a lot of heat from a lot of people, even some of the people in my own party, but they were there. In the end, they were there. They're all there. Look, this is about the nation. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats. This is about our nation. So we have a 5-day ceasefire. During that 5 days, the Kurds and other people they're going to be taken great care of. They're going to be moving around, moving out of a safe zone, which is something that Turkey has always wanted. The ISIS, they call them Daesh, but we call them ISIS. The ISIS fighters that we have captured, they'll be under very, very strict control of various different groups, but we will be watching. We will be in charge.
He also went on, and part of the clip also where he basically says the Turks need to go in there and cleanse it. I mean, he literally says the word cleanse. And I thought that was the clip that we had there, but I think it was just a different part of what Trump is saying there. But it's stunning.
So he knows enough to use the word cleanse. This is why when people say, "Oh, he's an idiot," he doesn't know. He knows. He has enough information there to use it the wrong way, to be dangerous with it. And I mean,
so somebody could have literally. It could have been one of the senators who have a problem with this come in and say, "You realize you're basically the Turks are going in there to ethnically cleanse this area," and he probably it just stuck in his head,
right?
And then regurgitates it. But this is, I mean, we're on the brink of a massive disaster. Now, the Kurds have been sold out by this country. I mean, I don't know when the first time was, but I know it goes back at least until like the Kissinger era, where the Kurds were used, where the Iranians used the Kurds, I think, on Iraq. And then when Saddam basically towed the line, we then sold out the Kurds to Saddam. And then George Herbert Walker Bush said, rise up in the north of Iraq and we'll be there for you. And we weren't. It's a horror show. I mean, I don't know what the solution is in terms of but this is, we're on the brink, I think, of another humanitarian catastrophe. And I don't know. I mean, look, the Syrian civil war was one that we couldn't, I think, in my estimation, do anything to improve the situation. But this is one which I think we caused. Do we have that clip of him saying cleanse? Yeah. All right, here it is.
A 22-mile strip that for many, many years, Turkey, in all fairness, they've had a legitimate problem with it. They had terrorists. They had a lot of people in there that they couldn't have. They've suffered a lot of loss of lives also, and they had to have it cleaned out. But once you start that, it gets to be to a point where a tremendous amount of bad things can happen. So a process started, and we started to negotiate. And I think that obviously the sanctions and tariffs were going to be very biting. I'm glad we don't have to do it. We'll be taking them off very quickly as soon as this is finalized. But this is an incredible outcome.
So, in other words, you can go in there, give us 5 days to get as many of those people out, then go ahead. We're going to lift the sanctions. There's a lot of people who are, I mean, there's two different theories here, right? One is that there's some type of payoff situation, which wouldn't be that terribly strange, knowing Donald Trump's modus operandi. The other is he just got rolled by Erdogan and was literally just too intimidated to do anything.
Do you think that, or
I don't know which one I believe, but it had to have been one of those two things. I mean, either there is some type of leverage being exercised on Trump, right? By, someone's giving him this idea to do it.
Someone is definitely doing it. Is it Erdogan, or is it who benefits from global destabilization and NATO? Well, I think we... Right. I mean,
look, Russia's not upset about this. Let's put it that way, obviously. But it could just be that Erdogan just sort of muscled him in. It could be that, he has a hotel there. But the idea that there is some type of, policy prescription here that he has thought out or that his people have thought out, or the idea that he thinks his people who vote for him are really that heavily invested in those, several hundred U.S. military personnel who are going to leave Syria. I mean,
you never want to minimize any sort of military presence, but it's pretty small.
And they were basically on a peacekeeping mission.
Exactly.
I mean, so of all the places you could pull our military out of, I mean, it was a combat theater, but they were not actively engaged in combat. I mean, it's hard to come up with an answer that people would get.
Yeah. It is fun to hear him talk about it like he's a goddamn game show host, though.
We made a deal.
You've been great,
real
Kurds.
fun.
Yep.
You will not be advancing to the next round. Bye-bye.
It's unbelievable.
Oh my God, I don't want to laugh at that. It's
folks,
very funny, but not.
Hey, today's show is sponsored by Babbel. Babbel is going to get you speaking a new language quickly and with confidence. You can choose from 14 different languages. You want to hear the...
What a segue.
Here it is. Yeah, well, you can learn Turkish. They can teach you Turkish at Babbel. German, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Swedish, Dutch, Turkish, Polish, Indonesian, Russian, Danish, Norwegian, and English.
No Greek?
Sorry.
Turkish and not Greek? What is this? No wonder I can't learn Greek still after 35 years.
Well... But now you have the opportunity to learn 14 other languages, Nomi.
Done. Easy.
And the thing about Babbel is that their lessons are created by over 100 language experts, real people, not by translation machines, not by artificial intelligence. The lessons are engaging and convenient. They last only 10 to 15 minutes, and you can learn through interactive dialogues so you perfect your pronunciation and accent. Babbel is available as an app or online. Your progress syncs across all devices. If you want in on the competition that we're going to launch very shortly with Babbel amongst everybody in the office who can speak their language quicker.
Tell me about this.
Michael is going to learn Portuguese, supposedly.
It's Brazilian Portuguese.
Oh my God.
I'm going for Spanish myself.
Okay.
I think Jamie's going Spanish. And I would imagine...
I have a bit of a head start, but in order for me to actually do this, it should probably be Spanish.
Yeah. And
I would like to improve my Spanish.
Matt, I would say German. Oh, French.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Wait, so is the competition like how much progress you make? Because if you have a base
how
in Spanish,
good you speak. Yeah, I know. That's
really...
we got to figure out some
it's going to be very qualitative.
I'll jump in on this.
Well, and as you listen to this show, Babbel has a special offer for you. Go to Babbel.com and select the language of your choice. Once you try it for free and are ready to sign up, select the 3-month option, and Babbel will give you another 3 months free with the promo code Majority. That's 6 months for the cost of 3 with promo code Majority. Go to Babbel, Babbel.com, enter promo code Majority. Babbel, speak a new language with confidence. And this is one of my favorite our advertisers. I use these guys quite a bit, actually. We've talked about Grove.co. It's Grove.co, not com, C-O. It's got healthy, plant-based, non-toxic cleaning products, ones that work. The good ones are actually enjoyable to use, and sometimes it's hard to know which products to trust. That's where Grove Collaborative comes in. Grove Collaborative is the online marketplace that delivers all-natural home, beauty, and personal care products directly to you. Very convenient. They offer reoccurring shipments, too, so you're always stocked with your favorite brands. Like, for me, Seventh Generation.
Yeah.
I mean, they have others, but Seventh Generation is the one because I'm very sensitive to smell. And so I get the Seventh Generation soap, hand soap. As you can see, we have it in all of our hand washing places here. You can join over 500,000 families who trust the Grove Collaborative to make their homes happier and healthier. Plus, shipping is fast and free on your first order. So the Seventh Generation,
good deal. I have to say, my mom just did this. My mom renovated her life and got rid of like every chemical in her house. And I walked in, and I was like, you must have spent a fortune, and doing this myself, Whole Foods, whatever. It's a really good deal.
Yeah, this is this stuff is it's convenient, and then there's new stuff that you find on there that I use. But for me, Seventh Generation, I got it for my dish soap, I got it for my hand soap. They've got the spray cleaners, and they have these their own little concoctions that they make. I don't know how to do it, but it's
what is that? A sponge?
No, it's a spray bottle, and then they have a concentrate, and you put the water in, and you have a spray bottle, and it's kids around. If you got pets, it makes you feel a little bit safer not to have all those chemicals. And for a limited time, when my listeners go to grove.co/majority, you will get a free 5-piece fall gift set from Mrs. Myers and Grove, free shipping, and a free 60-day VIP trial. For a limited time only, you can choose from the best-selling fall scents like apple cider, acorn spice, mum, and pumpkin spice. Simply go to grove.co/majority. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Eric Blanc will discuss the Chicago teacher strike with Nomi and myself. We'll be right back after this.
Nobody move, there's blood on the floor. And I can't find my heart. in the cold. So please give it back, 'cause it's not yours to take. It must have felt when I lost my mind. Deep in the cup, drowning in its pain. Somebody help, 'cause I can't find my way.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program the author of Red State Revolt, a book on the teacher strikes that took place last year. I think it was now. I can't, time is completely dilated for me. He's also a former high school teacher and a writer for Jacobin. Eric Blanc, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
So, Eric, you're in Chicago. Just give us the broad strokes of what's happening with this strike. And people should know, for context, this is the second strike that the Chicago Teachers Union has gone on since, I think the first one was in 2011, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the first strike really that broke the labor movement's refusal to withhold its labor for a long time and really started turning the tide on corporate education reform was the Chicago teachers strike of 2012, actually. So only 7 years ago. And in that time, we've really seen a sea change, most recently with the spread of the teachers strikes. But what you see now in Chicago is not only the teachers striking this time, but it's also the school staff personnel in Local 73, which is a SEIU affiliate. So you have teachers together with school workers on strike. Today is day 2 of their strike. And really, this is in some ways an offensive strike, which is to say that it's to roll back all of the budget cuts and understaffing and real deterioration of conditions that have been imposed upon both students and teachers over the last decades in Chicago. So the demands for the teachers are primarily around things like lower class sizes, demanding a nurse in every school, a counselor, real quality of education type demands. And then for the school workers, for them, a lot of them are making poverty wages. They're working 2-3 jobs. And for them, it really is not just about better conditions, but they need better pays just so they can survive and stay in Chicago.
One of the things that I think that really sort of came out of the 2012 strike was a widening sense or understanding of the concept of social justice unionism as opposed to the managerial unionism. And there's been a lot of since that time, I imagine it was, and maybe that's just when I became more conscious of it, but we've seen that spread, particularly in the context of teachers unions in particular, and not even unions in some of those states that you wrote about in Red State Revolt. But just give us a sense of what that means in the context of a teacher's strike.
Right. The slogan that Chicago coined in 2012, which is again the slogan and which has spread really across the country now, is we're fighting for the schools that our students deserve. And so the framing and the demands of the strike aren't limited to just getting better pay for teachers, and they're not limited just to getting better conditions for teachers. The idea is that in order to win against such powerful enemies, because we're talking not just about the Democratic establishment, but the big business interests that stand behind them and that are profiting off of privatization and that don't want to see their taxes go up in order to pay for good schools. So if you're going up against such powerful opponents, you need to roll deep. You need to bring in the community, you need to bring in parents, you need to bring in students. And that's really what Chicago in 2012 and since, and again now with this strike, has shown, is that if you can make this about the working class as a whole, because really that's what we're talking about. The whole city, you can't walk around Chicago right now without seeing almost on, every couple of blocks you'll see educators picketing together with students and parents. If you bring in all of working people in the city, then you're a lot stronger. And so really this is a type of model of unionism that used to exist. It's not really new. It's what the labor movement was founded on in the 1930s and earlier. The labor movement fought not only for its members, but for working people generally. That's one of the reasons why it had so much support. But reasons having to do with the institutionalization of the labor movement, that kind of broader working class struggle got lost. And so what's so exciting about the strikes in Chicago and then, West Virginia, Los Angeles in recent period is that it's bringing back that fight for social justice, what's called bargaining for the common good. And, it works. And that's why it's spreading.
Do you have a sense of how the teachers, because in the context of this type of strike, but also this kind of unionism, like the work is done right before the strike. I mean, these relationships are forged before the strike. The solidarity is created over time through, and I guess my question is like, through what? Like, what do you have a sense of what, from talking to the union folks there, what they learned in 2012 and how they, the lessons they took and what they went and started doing in terms of like broadening and deepening their reach and their relationships around the city, so to have that wider sense of support? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is that they're striking this time with all the other school employees. What else is indicative, or what else have you learned that they've done during that time that has sort of like pursued that goal more?
Right. So as you alluded to, teachers, not unlike some other professions like nursing or other workers, have, because of the nature of their job, organic links with broader sectors of the population. So that does give a lot of potential leverage for making connections in a way that isn't always the case for all workers. But there's nothing inevitable about that. For decades, teacher unions just fought, for the most part, for better pay, if they fought at all. And so what you've seen in CTU in 2012, and again, just to talk about right now, part of the way they won over parents is through the demands. And so because what they're fighting for are things like a nurse in every school, more counselors, smaller class sizes, it's very easy to make the case that, in fact, teachers aren't walking out on their students, but they're walking out for them. And for parents who, understandably, this is not an easy thing to deal with. If having school shut down creates a crisis for working class folks in any city, because where do you send your kids? What do you do? It's a sacrifice. But if you are fighting on behalf of their students, clearly, not just in rhetoric, but in the demands that you're insisting on winning from the city, then it becomes clear what the stakes are and why the broader community should support. And then even then, it's not inevitable. You can raise the demands, but you have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of outreach, meetings with parents, a lot of one-on-one discussions at the school sites. That's the sort of behind-the-scenes organizing that gets lost in, the really brief accounts of the strike. It makes it seem like they just pop off. But in fact, it takes a lot of work, just like any organizing drive.
What are they doing in terms of, I think I saw online Bread for Ed. What are they doing in terms of, like, there's a lot of public school kids who get their lunch at school. And that because they qualify for free lunch or, hopefully, and I'm not sure what the story is in Chicago. I know they do this in New York now, free lunch for everybody so that there's no stigma associated with it. What is the union doing in terms of like material help for parents and for students during the course of the strike that when they're dealing with issues that are a function of the strike?
Yeah. So, one of the things that the union has done is made the picket lines very inviting and supportive for both students and parents. And part of that is having a lot of food and a lot of singing and a lot of activities so that people will spend all day. And it's not very warm out right now. So spend all day, in the 40 degrees is not an easy ask. But, when you have that kind of proactive approach to getting folks out to the picket lines, it's easier. The Bread for Ed initiative actually came from the Chicago branch of the Democratic Socialists of America, which had done a similar initiative in Los Angeles with tacos for teachers, in the Oakland strike, with also called Bread for Ed. And so now there's a pretty strong tradition of Democratic Socialists taking the lead locally to raise funds. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. In past strikes, there's even hundreds of thousands of dollars to raise money for food for students who need it. And, it's that type of solidarity that's really important, because if we can make the case to working people, and I think they have shown that in Chicago, that this is their struggle. If the educators win, we all win. That requires a lot of effort. And it requires providing food. It requires providing all the types of support needed so that students have some sort of option when the strike is happening.
Well, what's your sense of? I mean, does anybody there have a sense of how long the strike is going to go on? I mean, is it how much are people hunkering down, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's not any sense that this is going to end very soon. You never know, but the mayor is really, to the surprise of many people, playing hardball. And the reason I say that is that Mayor Lightfoot ran on a progressive education platform. It was almost like she copy and pasted the teacher union's demands. That's what she ran on. And so the fact that there's a strike at all, and then now that the mayor is pleading poverty, despite having run on this platform, and the fact that there's actually over $1 billion more in yearly funds for Chicago schools. So the money's there, even though she's trying to claim it's not. So given that, we could see this drag on for a little while. My sense is that the mayor is going to get a lot more pressure to cede to the demands of teachers. And for the most part, the polls show, and just walking around the city shows, that the public is backing educators. So really the pressure is increasing and will continue to increase on the mayor to settle.
Lastly, at least from a reportorial perspective, is there anything going on there that you think we should know that we haven't talked about at this point? I got one more question after that, but that's a little bit less about what's going on specifically in Chicago.
Well, I mean, I think one of the aspects that I touched on, but it's just worth underlining, is how important it is that this is a strike, not just of the teachers union, CTU, but also of Local 73, of the, which represents the special education classroom assistants, the custodians, bus drivers, things like that. And the reason that's so important is that, unlike a lot of strikes, including some of the recent ones, this is a strike of all school workers. And it gives it a level of power to shut down the schools that is really important. And it's also, there's a racial justice aspect to this, because overwhelmingly the support staff are Black and brown, overwhelmingly female. And so the strike this time is about racial justice, not just in the sense that it's supporting Black and brown students, but because there's Black and brown workers who are taking the lead by taking this risk. And a lot of them, are making poverty wages, as I mentioned before. And for them, going without pay over, even just a couple of days is not an easy ask. So I think that, it's just worth highlighting that aspect of the story, because it's not just a teacher's strike.
Okay. So lastly, you literally wrote the book on the teacher strikes that took place over the past year or so in rather unlikely places, at least in terms of organizing, or I should say, institutionalized unions. And to a certain extent, there was a sense, I think, with those strikes that Chicago had set the template, on some level, and it wasn't necessarily the inspiration, at least not directly, right? Because there's a 5 or 6 year lag in between there. But do you think that this second Chicago strike will have a similar and or greater impact on other teachers' unions or just teachers around the country? Because it does feel like this is a more offensive strike, as you said, to open it up, as opposed to back in 2012. I think they were reacting to Rahm Emanuel wanting to shut down 50 schools and abandoning, all but abandoning some of the operating schools. Give me your sense of whether you think this will impact other teachers around the country.
Definitely. Well, the first thing to say is that the 2012 strike did have a real demonstrable impact on the more recent strike upsurge. Not necessarily for the teachers as a whole, but for the small groups of activists that actually initiated these strikes, many of whom were Democratic Socialists. They started their organizing by studying the Chicago strike in Arizona, West Virginia, very consciously trying to organize on a similar model. And then today, looking at the impact, I think you're right. This is going to make a big, real change as far as the dynamics of the movement, because similarly to the Los Angeles strike and earlier this year, we're at this very interesting moment in public education policy in which the Democrats have been forced from below to change their tune around corporate education reform, privatization, austerity. And so you have the space now, if the strikes continue, to not only beat back attacks, but to really start talking about winning schools that we need. And that's not inevitable. It's going to take a lot of struggle. But I think, the moment is really ripe, partly because we also have the 2020 elections coming up. You have Bernie Sanders calling for a moratorium on charter schools, massive refunding of schools. And so now everybody who's running is talking left. So the combination of these strikes continuing, the Democratic Party saying that they support education, which is a good thing we need to lean on, and then the presidential elections means that there's a moment now that, if it's seized, can really start transforming the schools in a way that we haven't seen for decades.
And I should also add one more element of that. Not only has there been, it seems like a change, a retreat from the corporate reform movement within the Democratic Party. Part of that is not is also a function of, frankly, the Gates Foundation's experiment, the $750 million some odd dollars that they pumped into education to experiment with all of the things that we know as corporate education reform. They came out with a report. I guess I can't remember if it was the end of 2017, by maybe end of 18. Didn't work. The Rand Foundation comes out with Rand study comes out with a report. It didn't work. We should probably listen to educators. And so there does feel like not only like that. There's no rudder right now in the world of education. It seems to me, at least in terms of like the corporate forces and as reflected in the Democratic Party, there's room, like you say, there's oxygen there, and I think there's just not the same countervailing forces at this point.
Yeah, and I would take it a step further, which is to say, if you can transform public education now, get a massive refunding of the schools and really show what a robust, quality public sector could look like in education, well, think about the implications of that across the board, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a Green New Deal, when we're talking about Medicare for all. It's the case that actually a well-funded public sector is better for all working people and the vast majority of people in this country if you give it the funds it needs. And so the stakes really around education, which is one of the few remnants of the welfare state in this country, are really explosive, because if you can show that education is better when it's run by the people and public sector, really, why shouldn't that hold for other industries and for other sectors of the economy? And so I think that's what we're talking about, and it's why the moment we're in is so exciting.
All right, Eric Blanc, people can follow you on Twitter at _Eric Blanc. Couldn't get that first one without the underscore, huh, buddy?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know who these other Eric Blancs are. I'm going to track them down someday.
But folks can follow you on Twitter and, of course, pick up Red State Revolt to learn more. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So there you have it. We broke format today to have a guest.
It's important.
The thing is, there's so many stories going on right now that in any other era, this would be a story I would spend the whole day on.
Well, I'm also thinking, flashback to, 2004, and we were having education presidential debates with Republicans talking about, their version of education reform. Right. But how missing, we didn't have one education question in the Democratic debates. And that is an area, they might be frozen right now, the Cory Bookers of the world and the Pete Buttigieg and even Joe Biden's. I mean, these are ed reform. They've been backed by charter schools throughout their entire careers, and I think if you look back to the last 10 years of the Democratic Party, that has been the marker for who is a neoliberal and who is not. Even Hillary Clinton was not a charter school person. I always gave that to her. She was, tough on a lot of other issues. But when it came to education, she stood by the teachers. Maybe not as progressive as we would have liked, but at least she wasn't a charter school. She was more progressive on that than the Obama administration.
Well, I mean, that's funny because I remember interviewing some of the top teacher union folk at the DNC,
right?
And about at the Democratic National Convention about how early they endorsed Clinton, and there was some sense of like, maybe had we known that Sanders, but people wanted to get in there first.
Right.
And I think like I think the sense was, and I spoke to Randy Weingarten, subsequent to that, and the way that she explained it to me was like they felt that they got burned in 2008 by not getting to the table first, getting in there early, and it allowed other forces to get in. I mean, it's sort of interesting, that dynamic that exists there, the calculation that's made. You want to get in early in an endorsement if you feel like you need to have more influence. And I don't know that I mean, you would have obviously a much better sense of this. I think on some level, just, having, with your direct involvement in politics, but I don't know that makes sense to people.
I don't know if it's working anymore. I mean, that's the top-down union management that still is a force of nature in unions, but it's also become, one of the biggest problems. The teachers union is very progressive. Obviously, the membership in 2016 supported Bernie, and there was a little bit of an uprising, a response to Randy Weingarten, who is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. But when you look at a state like New York, this is actually a perfect example. Governor Cuomo takes tons of charter school money, and the IDC that held up the government took tons of charter school money. But the unions, not just the teachers unions, and it's a little complicated in New York because we have two, but not just the teachers unions, but other unions feel like they have to support the governor at the end of the day because he controls the budget.
Yep.
And that's the power.
It's a smart calculation, right? Because they know that these unions knew that if by some miracle Cynthia Nixon won the election, she wasn't going to punish them. She was still going to be a pro-union governor. But if Cuomo got in, which he was probably going to, and they didn't endorse him, he's a vindictive asshole. And it's the same thing with leaders of a lot of unions.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. And I think there has been a change at the very least. It's not a radical change in the context of particularly the Weingarten's union, that the membership has exerted its power more, and they've done so by withholding their labor across the country in many respects. And there was I went to that teachers union, I guess it was maybe last year in Pittsburgh, the conference, and there was a sense of like, hey, we sort of forgot. I mean, this is more the local folks. Yes. We sort of forgot that we had these arrows in our quiver, and there's a feeling like we're much more likely to go grab one. Right. And I think that sentiment has the implications of that sentiment is that the leadership of the union is aware that, like, I've got a more militant union now. Mm-hmm. And that militancy is not necessarily just fired at the management of the schools.
Right.
It's, they're gonna take more control and demand more say within the context of the union. So this is, I mean, that has big implications, I think, for the union movement going forward. And I think we're gonna, I think, and particularly if Donald Trump loses, regardless of who is the Democratic president, I think we're going to see unions become even more aggressive going forward.
Oh yeah, and let's just be real. The tipping point was Betsy DeVos. Cory Booker had to suddenly flip his script on unions because he'd been palling around with Betsy effing DeVos.
I mean, Eric Blanc mentioned the DSA in all of this, and this goes back to the rank and file strategy, which got a little bit of attention after it passed at the National Convention this year, wherein DSA members, young socialists, are encouraged and helped to get jobs in strategic sectors so that we can get more involved in our unions and create something more radical, grassroots, and rank and file. Right. And it's kind of a win-win because a lot of young people in DSA need good jobs anyway. So it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yep. All right, let's turn back just to Turkey for one more moment, because I know that, I mean, you were in the area, right?
Yeah, I was there in August, and I was like, well, where could I go? I had to get out of the EU for just for you guys to know, in case you're curious, you can only stay in the EU for 90 days, but there are parts of the EU that have unilateral agreements, and you can leave the EU area and then go back to that country, and it's a reset. But it's only like Greece, France, a couple of other states. So I went to Turkey as a Greek, which is controversial. And, every travel advisory says don't go if you're an American. Some of it's a little overblown and retaliatory against Turkey. Same thing from the EU. But I wanted to see, it was like, well, can I go? How far in can I go before, it gets very dangerous? And sure enough, you can, as an American, go right to the border. It's extremely dangerous, obviously, but I was a little surprised that, given, because I wanted to go to a refugee camp. I should back it up, like why I actually wanted to go. And you can go, you can't get into the refugee camps unless if you're press, but you can go to volunteer. But it's extraordinarily dangerous. And it just really blew me away by the lack of restrictions. Turkey to me is a really confusing place for a million reasons. It's extremely developed. There was so much hope. If you look back to the Obama administration, Biden and Obama were praising their relationship with Erdogan early on, trying to build a strong friendship. Erdogan was notably a friend of Obama's. And when you go to a place like Istanbul, if you haven't been there, it's a beautifully democratic city as a facade. There's people are freely expressing themselves to a limit until they're arrested. So there's, I want to be cautious because I did talk to people. I was there, Turkish people, and I want to respect them. But those who I did talk to about their ability to freely express themselves, it actually reminded me a lot of being in Trump's America. But with us, it's like through technology, through them, it's like they have to be very cautious about how they organize because they will be rounded up. It depends on what community you're from in the United States, but there's surveillance everywhere. And I just think it's going to get worse depending on what your background is. If you're Kurdish, this is bad.
The next 5 or 6 days are going to be rather telling. And we should say that right after the supposed ceasefire, there was fighting continued along the border. Now, that happens after ceasefires, but what was more relevant was just the way that essentially Turkey was characterizing it. It's not a ceasefire. It's just basically saying, like, we're going to give you a little time to get out.
Well,
then we're going to start.
The other aspect of this is from the EU's perspective, they're doing everything they can right now to control the refugee flow. Because depending on what country you're from, whether it's Poland that just basically like shuts them out, or Germany, which, has opened their arms to refugees, or Greece, of course, the pathway is really complicated. Like I was thinking about it while I was in Greece. I was like, wait, how are they getting on? But why don't they just go up through landmass and it has to do with these restrictive countries like Poland where they're blocking. Right. So that's why they're getting on the boats, and it's extraordinarily dangerous in the Mediterranean waters. And it's actually, the distance is even that large. It's a small distance. It's just going to get worse. And, that destabilizes the EU. That actually is a huge cost to the EU. Not that we should ever look at it from that perspective, but they're already having those problems, and this isn't, as you said, a member-ish of NATO. How does this affect the stability of the EU, of the world, frankly? Right.
It's a little bit scary. And Donald Trump, of course, has said that it's terrific and fine. So we're okay. Meanwhile, let's turn to the other half a dozen important stories that took place yesterday. The Mick Mulvaney.
It's my favorite story.
This is the quid pro quo, or the other one?
Oh, yeah, there's two Nick Mulvaney. The G7 one.
Okay, yeah, I guess we could start with the G7. And one wonders if, I don't know, here it's hard to impart to Trump and the administration like some type of strategy. But I think tactics-wise, I think it's fair to say that Trump understands, like, it doesn't matter. You can just keep putting stuff out there. And if something's a little bit less controversial, I'd rather have people talking about this than that. And we'll get back to that. But the this is that Mick Mulvaney went out and did his press, did a press availability. And they don't do many press. I mean, we don't see this anymore, right? There's no more like.
Well, he's a chief of staff, number one.
Right.
So,
but we don't see even like White House press briefings really anymore.
How many days? 200 and something? 300?
And so here's Mick Mulvaney coming out to talk about the fact that the White House did a rigorous search for where to hold the G7 summit. And through their rigor and a series of vetting committees and analyses that they ran, they found that the best location that could exist for the G7 would be in Florida. In fact, at coincidentally, the Trump Doral Hotel.
That have been used by past administrations. There's a long list of the accommodations on site, the ballrooms, bilateral rooms, the number of rooms, the photo ops, the support hotels that are there, the proximity to cities and airports, helicopter landing zones, medical facilities, etc. So we use the same set of criteria that previous administrations have used. We started with a list of about a dozen just on paper. And we sent an advanced team out to actually visit 10 locations in several states. We visited California, Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, Michigan, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah. We got that list down to just under 10, and the advanced team went out to visit those. And from there, we got down to 4 finalists that our senior team went out to look at. They looked at, I think it was 1 in Hawaii, 2 in Utah, and then the Mar-a-Lago facility in Florida. And it became apparent at the end of that process that Doral was by far and away the best physical facility for this meeting. In fact, I was talking to one of the advanced teams when they came back, and I said, what was it like? And he said, Mick, you're not going to believe this, but it's almost like they built this facility to host this type of event. If any of you have been there, you know that there's separate buildings with their own rooms, separate and apart from each building, so that one country could have a building, another country could have another. You folks could have your building for the press, and obviously the common areas are going to be perfect for our needs down there. Again, anticipating your questions, how is this not an emoluments?
Right, yeah, that's a good question, actually. I would start with that one. How is this not an emoluments problem? I mean, I wish we had footage of the look on the reporters' faces as he's saying this, and they're all just going like, are you serious?
You can hear them laughing. Did you hear the point where someone
is cracking up?
When this happened, I was at Fox News ready to go on, and then there was another press conference. And so I'm just Googling, where's the Cora? I wanted to know who owned it because, he licenses his name out. So I'm thinking, well, maybe does like Russia own it? Does China? Who the hell knows who actually? Turkey, for all we know, could own it. But then I when I was doing it, just in May, there was a report saying that Trump's prized Doral Resort is in steep decline, according to company documents showing his business problems are mounting. How opportunistic.
I'm surprised he didn't have pictures of like, look at these kids having fun there. It's a family place. And it's basically an infomercial for the hotel. And I would like to see, I hope someone is foiling all those trips that they took to go check out all these different places. We sent people far and wide. We sent people across the country. We went from sea to shining sea to find the best resort in the country. And it turns out to be Donald Trump's resort. Can you
the one
imagine?
That's also in decline.
Yeah. There we go.
Surprise.
Thank you.
The other thing is, this is a golf resort, and we know Donald Trump loves to golf. But I was just thinking about these meetings? Like how many? I know some of them when they go to Camp David, when they've been at Camp David, which is the history traditionally, they're not recorded meetings, but there is something intimate and odd about having meetings on a golf course. And I was thinking about that the other day. Like he spent a third of his presidency on the golf course meeting with people.
Yep. I think it's hard to imagine that they didn't do this as a way of sort of distracting and changing the news cycle. However, despite the fact that it was clear that Mick Mulvaney was out there announcing that after a rigorous search, they were going to hold the G7 at Donald Trump's hotel as a way of turning the page, maybe, or at least getting the news off of the huge disaster that the Turkey and northern Syria, not to mention the impeachment. Mick Mulvaney, apparently, from what I understand, CNN reports that he was not briefed about what to say about the impeachment stuff. And so he was on a slightly different page than the entire legal team of the administration, which has been trying to argue there's no quid pro quo here.
He's the acting chief of staff.
Yes.
Yeah. But to be fair, the legal team is Rudy Giuliani and his 5 detained associates.
Well, to be fair, too, it's also Jay Sekulow, and he, I think, had to do the drive time radio show in Boston. So isn't that where he does it or something like that? But
sounds right.
Yeah. Here is Mick Mulvaney making what we would call probably, I think the technical term is a boo-boo.
Actors. Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that. But that's it. And that's why we held up the money. Now, there was a report.
So the demand for an investigation into the Democrats was part of the reason that he ordered to withhold funding to Ukraine.
The look back to what happened in 2016 certainly was part of the thing that he was worried about in corruption with that nation. And that is absolutely appropriate.
Withholding the funding.
Yeah, which ultimately then flowed. By the way, there was a report that we were worried that the money wouldn't, if we didn't pay out the money, it would be illegal. Okay, it would be unlawful. That is one of those things that has that little shred of truth in it that makes it look a lot worse than it really is. We were concerned about over at OMB about an impoundment, and I know I just put half of you folks to bed, but there's the Budget Control Act, Budget Control Impoundment Act of 1974 says that if Congress appropriates money, you have to spend it. Okay, at least that's how it's interpreted by some folks. And we knew that money either had to go out the door by the end of September, or we had to have a really, really good reason not to do it. And that was the legality of the issue.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happen as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. We were holding up money at the same time for the Northern Triangle countries. We were holding up aid at the Northern Triangle countries so that they would change their policies on immigration. By the way, and this speaks to an important point.
Yeah, their policies on immigration, I mean, arguably, maybe has something to do with sort of U.S. interests. Harder to make the case that asking them to pursue a conspiracy theory that they think will vindicate the president is really in national interest.
Right.
But Mick Mulvaney comes out, says, yeah, it's quid pro quo. We do it all the time. And now he doesn't acknowledge, and nobody asks him in that exchange, as far as I can tell. Well, how come he also brought up Burisma and Biden in that phone call? I mean, we know he did. And it would have been interesting to see if Mick would be that far off the script. However, later in the day, he put out a written statement saying that, no, I didn't mean that. I didn't say there was a quid pro quo.
Take it back, Mick.
He's on the way out, right?
Aren't
they about to fight? Not him. Like, he's not choosing to be on the way out. Wasn't the rumor last week that he was about to be canned?
No, I don't think so. I think that was Rick Perry.
I know that one.
No,
there's just too many to keep up with, guys. Come on.
I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't cut him loose after this on some. This is a pretty major screw up for those people who want to argue that there was no quid pro quo. To have the acting chief of staff say, "Yeah, no, of course." Of course there was.
At this point,
and also on top of that, there's like a thread of truth that it was illegal for us to withhold the money. Like, I mean, there was. Yesterday I did had an exchange with Tim Pool. I think they're going to release it this week, and we spent a long time. He had a lot of different Ukrainian theories about depositions that had taken place in Ukraine, saying that the Bidens had done this and that, and who knows if it's illegal, and we can't really know the truth. There's two different sides of it, and that's why impeachment's not going to be good. We also argued the political side, and we'll get to those polls in a moment that he was a little surprised existed. But, I mean, there was a moment where I said, look, you have the sort of the moral, not moral, but the ethical and the sort of the hold people who are in power to account. And it's quite clear that there was a tremendous amount of, if not illegality, inappropriateness that warrants an impeachment in terms of what a president can and cannot do, or should and should not do. But the other aspect of that is the political one. Mm-hmm. And we now know that, I now know, as of yesterday, I thought, we're hovering at around 50% who want impeachment. And I cited the Fox News poll, and he told me, well, that oversampled Democrats because of those Fox News polls always do that. And he had some numbers, and I'm like, well, okay, fine. Go Google what the real clear politics average is. And it turned out to be 52%. Right. So it's a little bit higher than he thought.
And with
but
Republicans,
that was irrelevant.
And with Republicans, it's going up.
It's gone up 20 some odd points amongst Republicans, independents, and Democrats are through the roof.
Right.
And more importantly, I have here a polling that shows that you have Republican senators, 2020s. I'll read this off. Susan Collins, since February of 2019, her net approval rating has dropped 2 points to -6. Tom Tillis has dropped 3 points to -5. Joni Ernst has lost 9 points.
That's great.
In favorability. She's at -4 now. Cory Gardner has dropped 3 to -3. Martha McSally has dropped 1 to just 2 points positive. Doug Jones in Alabama, gone up 3 points.
Unbelievable.
He's up at 5. He's a 5 a net.
Wow.
And Gary Peters in Michigan, up 1. And John Cornyn in Texas, the only one who has had no change. These are the most vulnerable Senate Republicans. Iowa voters soured on Joni Ernst by 9 points. And you can see it the way that she's talking about stuff. She is definitely trying to say we need to hold the president to account, sort of. And she's got to walk that tightrope. I mean, from a political standpoint, all the stuff that's coming out of here, what would be your perspective on how the Democrats should approach impeachment at this point?
At this point, Donald Trump is creating his own impeachment every day. I mean, I think it's very hard with impeachment to look back on previous impeachments. Everyone has been saying it's bad politically because of, we lost the midterms and blah, blah, blah. But there's really no case study. We're in a presidential year. And despite the fact that it might not be done.
You don't think Andrew Johnson's experience holds here?
I actually don't.
Okay, fair enough.
Very good point. I will pick up that book again and reread it from a decade ago, that won the Pulitzer. No, I think I think that the scenario is about the Senate. And I think you've been really smart to lay that out. In every state also where we have an early primary like Iowa, not only is Joni Ernst doing it to herself, but you have Democrats literally like blanketing Iowa with an anti-impeachment, anti-Trump message. And like, this is what we want to be as a party. And I think and Iowa's a very mavericky state like Arizona is. And Democrats aren't invested in Alabama. So that's why you see a Doug Jones doing so well right now, despite the fact that the president is losing popularity. So overall, I think it's a good scenario for Democrats, especially in states where there's real presidential primaries, because that message, the more you invest in the message, the more people everybody
Democratic primaries or
Democratic.
or
I mean, there's no great. He has a Republican primary, but
well,
see how that
I mean, there's
plays
some
out.
states that have canceled the primary.
Right.
I mean, there's like a half a dozen states that have canceled that primary. But so wait, so the point being that the states where you have early primaries are seeing more messages from Democrats that we need to impeach this president, and it's creating pressure on their Republican opponents. So in some ways, what you're saying is that, if I'm not mistaken, that what we're watching with Joni Ernst is an early indicator of what's going to happen to Susan Collins and what's going to happen to Tom Tillis and what's going to happen to Cory Gardner when this impeachment message sort of like gets blasted in their state.
Right. And the message is working because Donald Trump isn't doing anything to counter it. You know, in the past, again, we can't look at past impeachments for a whole array of reasons.
Right.
This is a presidential election. There's going to be over $1 billion spent just on the Democratic side, you know, after the general election. This is why Democrats have to compete in every state. Every state you compete in, every state that you invest in is your message getting out. And when you don't invest in that message, the Republicans take over.
Fill the vacuum.
Fill the vacuum, exactly. And I think Democrats are starting to see that. I mean, with Maine, for instance, Emily's List is pushing their candidate very hard. I mean, Maine is an unusual state, but there is a possibility, you know, given the weaknesses, that we could win. We could win back that seat. And that makes all the difference.
Yep.
But we could lose the presidency, let's be clear.
Teresa Greenfield, backed by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and Emily's List, outraised Ernst in Iowa. In Arizona, Mark Kelly, and he's going to be probably my third least favorite senator if he wins.
I don't know if he's going to win that one.
He's outraised McSally. Like, and you're right. She's dropping. She hasn't dropped, as precipitously as the others, but she's now at 2 net.
She's never been, a Trump advocate. She's fairly moderate. Put her back, next to Mark Kelly, and you'd be like, what's the difference?
Well, there will be a big difference if Mitch McConnell allows a vote in the Senate, right? That's why I don't think he will ever allow us. Right. He says he will, but he will not. He will find some reason why it's an illegitimate impeachment inquiry, and he will not hold the vote. Because if he holds the vote, Mark Kelly's job is just sitting right there for him. Yeah. How do I make a distinction? How do I tie her to Trump? She voted to protect him.
That's right.
And that's the vote that she desperately doesn't want to take. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think Mitch McConnell is full of it.
And that's what McCain was so famous for. Arizona's a weird state that I think Democrats are just starting to figure out. It's not traditional conservatives, and it's not traditional Democrats or independents. It's very mavericky, very populist, very libertarian. And it's why John McCain could get away with voting against Republicans on health care and many issues, not all, but many issues. Because of that.
Or at the very least, talk about it. I don't know if he voted as much as he did talk about it in those scenarios. But I guess dipping in with the impeachment stuff just a little bit more. I mean, how do you think the Democrats should handle it insofar as like hearings? I mean, do you think this is something they should wrap up quickly? It seems like that. I'm not hearing that as much from Nancy Pelosi. 3 weeks ago, she's like, we're going to do this quick. And now it seems like there's a lot of stuff to cover here.
I have no idea. I mean, it's all happening behind closed doors and the message is changing. On one hand, it seems to be working for Democrats on the Senate side, as we just said. But when you go back down into the districts, people want to hear, what are the Democrats offering us? What's the actual difference? Let's talk about Medicare for all. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about, all the issues, the bread and butter table issues dinner table issues that people vote on. But it's also working. So, right. I mean, I really think we're in uncharted territory. People, I think, are now like, oh, this guy actually might go down. This is fascinating, including myself. I was tuning it out.
Right.
And I'm now like, wait, what? What's happening? Is Mick Mulvaney the next one out? I think the country is starting to pay attention, as they do in all elections, right? They pay attention, when it starts to matter.
Right.
And the same thing with impeachment. It's a good fundraising opportunity for a lot of Democrats.
It's been a good one for Trump, too.
progressives, the progressives that are advocating for the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, are the ones who pushed for impeachment. So at the end of the day, you can chew gum and walk as Democrats as long as you make sure to walk.
That's right. The most ambitious policies that the Democrats are offering came from the most aggressive pro-impeachment freshman Democrats, frankly.
I do wonder if it's giving something to the centrist Democrats that they can run on, and giving sort of like an uneven advantage there, right? Like if the progressive Democrats have real material issues like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, and they're running on that, and the centrist Democrats have basically the same nothing as always, and they're running on that, wouldn't impeachment give sort of an uneven advantage to the centrists in a way?
I don't know. I mean, you look at some of these primaries.
Are you, just to clarify, you're saying in the primaries or in the general elections?
In the primaries right now, but maybe both. I don't know.
It's strange because I was just looking at the fundraising numbers for congressional candidates, and it's still a little early.
Right.
A little early, not too early. And the numbers just came out, and it seems like for the most part, with exception to a few key races where they're getting a lot of attention, the Adam Schiffs of the world, the Jerry Nadlers of the world, the Carolyn Maloneys of the world still have an extraordinary amount of money and are raising that money. I don't know if it's off of impeachment or if it's just the establishment is really protecting them the way that they didn't for what's our old congressman's name?
Crowley.
Crowley, I forgot his name.
Well, I think there's a much greater awareness that wait, we could this insurgency is real now.
It's the return of the establishment, as a friend of mine said. But with that being said, there's also more progressives running. Some of these primaries are split, which is not great for progressives. And I think that's a great message for anybody who's thinking about running for office. When you have three progressives in a race against one establishment candidate, it's very hard to raise money when you're a progressive and there's one candidate to choose. Not saying that it should be that way all the time, but it ends up, that's a scenario that ends up happening. But, Carolyn Maloney, she was just because of the death of, my God, I'm like losing it today. Who died yesterday? Representative Cummings.
Cummings.
Thank you. So because of the death of Cummings, she was just put into his position on the oversight committee.
Oh,
so,
did she become the chairwoman of oversight? Oh,
yeah.
And that's got to be, I mean, that's a protection racket right there.
That's a protection racket right there. So at the end of the day, I mean, she's the one who's out there campaigning for impeachment, raising money off of it, and is in this position. They're just going to back her up even more so.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to help her, I think, no doubt, in that primary challenge, because she's also going to be on TV. I mean, she's head of the oversight committee. It's, putting aside, if there was no impeachment, she would still have that huge advantage, because there's all sorts of reasons why you would hear from the government oversight committee when you're talking about, what the Trump administration is doing, emoluments, a whole host of other things too. But I think I don't know that it works for it necessarily works for all of the incumbents, that it helps them, the impeachment stuff.
Right.
I definitely think it helps both incumbents and progressives in the general election, without a doubt. I mean, I think it's such a value add going up against a Republican, particularly if you're a challenger and they have to take this vote. Now, the Republicans in the House will have to take the vote. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to make it much harder in many respects for them to take back the House, if there was any chance of them doing that. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, even in those frontline districts, I just saw some polling. Cheryl Bustos sent out a memo saying we got to be very careful, because it's only a 2-point net positive in terms of impeachment in these districts. And that's a tough way to
swing districts that she's
These are the
about?
Swing districts. These are the frontline Democrats, like the 7 or 8, most sort of like at risk seats that the Democrats hold. There's still a net positive for impeachment in these districts.
Right.
So that's very hard to raise the sort of like alarm bell and say we shouldn't do this.
And that's where they're actually, a lot of those seats are being primaried right now. You have the Cisneros district in Texas, right? So these are flippable districts. And I think, if you're an incumbent, going back to your original point, and, there's this delicate dance between getting through your primary when you have certain targeted primary opponents that are raising $300,000 or $800,000. I mean, some of these races, the challengers are raising an extraordinary amount of money because just as the DCCC will target specific districts, now progressive groups are targeting specific districts. And so at the end of the day, if a challenger does win and beat that incumbent, now that challenger has to go and run against a Republican. And
if the vote gets taken, I think it puts Republicans in a tough position.
Yeah.
I think it just does. I mean, because we can see even in these districts, you got 2 percentage points of in favor of impeachment on top of everything else that the Democrats may or may not offer in that instance. Even if the challenger, the Republican challenger, doesn't take the vote, they have to answer how they would vote, right? I mean, because if they say I would vote against the president in most of these districts, they're going to lose, like almost like in that instant. 10, 20% of their base is just going to say, like, no, I stand with the president. I'm not going to come out and I'm not going to vote for you ever. And under any circumstance, I think these people will walk away.
How do you think that's going to play out in with RNC? I mean, is RNC going to back the president? Lindsey Graham pulled away again. How do you think this is going to trickle down into communities where?
I think to a certain extent, the Republicans view what's going on with Turkey as like a gift because it gives them some reason to separate themselves from the president on foreign policy that they can make, where they feel like they have the military on their side. This not abandoning the Kurds also dovetails nicely if you're a war hawk,
right?
Because you want to be able to have proxy wars, and this is going to inhibit our ability to have proxy wars. And so I think they perceive this as a gift. I think this lets Lindsey Graham sort of like have it both ways. But this is going to go. This is either going to turn into a disaster that it's going to be much harder to continue to support the president. Or it's just not, we're not going to be talking about it in 6 to 8 months. But we will be talking about impeachment in 6 to 8 months. And so I think from a political standpoint, I just don't think they can afford to distance themselves from Donald Trump. I mean, there's a certain, higher percentage of Republicans that are supporting impeachment. But at the end of the day, there's still 50% of the Republican Party, period. Unless Donald Trump is naked on the White House lawn chasing, that little boy in that picture of the lawnmower, I don't think they're going to abandon him. And I think not only are they not going to abandon him, I think they're going to go after whomever tries to take Trump down.
Well, look at Mitt Romney, for instance. Mitt Romney is contrasting himself. He lives in Utah. Utah is a state, even though it's extremely red, it is extremely anti-Trump.
It's probably the only state in the country where you could get away with that.
Maybe Arizona. I mean, to an extent. Arizona, it's not all Trump crazies.
Right.
There's a large Mormon population in Arizona as well. So, I mean, one seat here, one seat there, you've got Lindsey Graham challenging him, then suddenly, there isn't going to be some sort of chorus of...
I just don't... I think that it could happen that way, but I think that the support for Trump is too rock solid and too big in the Republican Party. And because it's also, you got to remember, it's not like that doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
Donald Trump if he starts to see erosion with the Republicans, he's going to go at them. And you're going to get Mark Levin and you're going to get Sean Hannity and you're going to get the whole crew on their radio shows. And, that's how the Republicans lose is that they are at the Trumpistas basically say, no way. I mean, it's not like Donald Trump's going to be quiet about it.
Right.
He's not going to take the lumps. He's going to go out and he's going to attack these people.
And you see it in his donations. I mean, those small dollar donations blew me away.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say that Russia created this man and there was a pseudo social media support of him. But at the end of the day, those small dollar donations are very real and very competitive.
Yep. All right.
Joe Biden ain't got him.
No. We're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half, and we've got a lot of clips to take a look at. Also, just a stunning story of the White House. This is, if there was ever a trial to see, how many sociopaths are in that White House now, we would we'll show you that clip. Folks, a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. And don't forget, go right now, because you can listen to the show live on your app. Go and download the Majority Report app. It's at majorityapp.com. It gives you access to the YouTube channel, tells you how to support the show, et cetera, et cetera. You can listen to the AM Quickie, super easy. You can listen to the podcast. You can log in as a member, and we have a new super easy way to log in now. If you forget your email, if you forget your password, all you got to do is click a button, and we'll send you a one-time key through your email address. So it's super easy to log in. And once you log in, you can search archives. And the episode archives, super easy to search. Let's see. How about we'll search Nomi?
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Let's see. Let's see what happens here. I wish we could.
Which hit pieces come up first?
Oh, wait. No, but this is just on this show, so we don't have any hit pieces.
It doesn't go through Google. Okay, you said Google. And
No, this is just. So, Nomi, you've been on this show quite a bit. Somehow you came up during, and I don't know, I have to look in the. We had you on the fun half. I'm not exactly sure why you're in that. I got to check that out, but showed up 123, 124, 125, January 29th. There you are, February 8th. Don't know the year on that. Also, let's see. February 14th. Maybe we were talking about you in the in your race. That's what it was. Yep.
You guys were plugging. That was so nice of you.
9/11 you were on.
Oh, I do remember that was this year.
Yeah. I have it all there in the app. So check it out, majorityapp.com. Also, check out our Instagram page, majorityreport.fm on Instagram. Good stuff happening over there. And as always, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Nomi, do you want to plug your Twitter follow?
I was just tweeting someone back, actually. I was talking about languages. They're like, well, this would help you with your language. I'm like, oh, I've tried that.
Well, go find Nomi on Twitter. Jamie?
Nomiki Konst.
Well, I'll just remind you, today's Friday, and so Wednesday happened this week. TMBS was on a special night because of the
had a Ryan Grimm in studio.
Ryan Grimm was in studio,
and had a good conversation on the whole Bernie versus Warren debate.
Well, so we never hear that.
Never talk about that.
That never happens anymore. No one ever talks about that. We never hear that.
Well, if you want a little break from the Bernie Warren debate, you can listen to this bonus episode of the Antifada that just came out today for our patrons. Oh! Yeah, that's right. It is the first episode of Andy's new side project in which he focuses on Latin American politics and history. So in this one, he speaks with the bread tuber Bad Empanada about the upcoming elections in Argentina that will return Kirchnerismo to power after 4 years of Mauricio Macri's neoliberal buffoonery. But can left populist Peronism walk the country back from the brink of economic collapse? Or will there be a new insurrection like in the year 2000? And who do the Posadists support? That's right, there's still Posadists in Argentina. After that, they discuss the life and politics of Che Guevara and the claims that he was a blood-soaked homophobic murderer. They talk about the excesses of the Cuban government, the extent of Che's role in them, and some of their favorite stories of the revolution and after. Check it out, folks. Patreon.com/The Antifada. Also, I've got an op-ed in Protean Mag called It's Not That Surprising That Ellen is Friends with Bush and Other Crimes of Hollywood Liberalism. So check it out.
And put a link to that on the podcast today. Matt?
And they had the worst cover-up ever.
We'll be talking about the Salem witch trials in the upcoming Literary Hangover episode as a state cover-up. The increase in Cotton Mather kind of really fanned the flames there, and then took to books to cover up their role in that. Whoa. And it really discredited the theocracy at the end of the 17th century there. So we'll be talking about that. So Literary Hangover, subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast feed.
Who knew? All right.
I'm going to listen to that.
See you in the fun half, 646-257-3920. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.